Good morning, everybody. I'm glad to be here today. I'm going to talk today quite a bit about a topic I talk quite a bit about. And we're going to dive into the first step of what it takes to reverse burnout and start turning things around. That first step is being honest with yourself about where you're really at in terms of the burnout process. So, why would I be talking about this? Well, the reason is quite simple. I lived in denial for way too long. I pretended I was a superhero for way too long. I bought into the whole girl power, you can do this, you can do everything. And I ignored the warning signs that were in my life. And I learned, I could start to see it at the time, but I've really learned a lot since then that not being totally honest with myself about where I truly was, what I needed, and what my own part in all this craziness was what was keeping us spinning and keeping us stuck much longer than we needed to be stuck. And I don't want that to happen to you. So I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I've decided to share some of my story with you and let you see for yourself kind of where I was at and how I got to where I was. So it wasn't very long after my husband and I got married that we decided we wanted to have kids. Life definitely had a different plan for us though. 5 years, 2 surgeries and several rounds of infertility treatment later, we were blessed with a biological miracle baby who has been an absolute light in our lives. But there was no explanation ever as to why or why not, to why we got her or why there weren't more brothers and sisters for her. When she was about 3, actually 3 years, it was I guess about 3 years that we kept trying to have more biological kids. And when our daughter was about 3, I had a devastating miscarriage. Our marriage had taken a serious beating. The infertility treatments made me absolutely crazy. Like, I was a fanged monster. Really, truly, I was. Those were not good times in my life. And we realized that it was time to close that door on trying to make this body have more babies. And we decided to adopt. And that was such a freeing decision that, we were closing one door intentionally. We weren't going to walk both roads. And we decided to close it immediately and start a new adventure. And that new adventure was adoption. And we quickly got the paperwork, quickly got started. And our first 9 months were stuck in paperwork limbo because we had moved from out of state. It had been less than 5 years since we'd moved from out of state. And our paperwork, everything was just at a dead standstill until that background check came back from our previous state, which of course those things are never an emergency for anybody but us. And as fate would have it, the morning that our clearance came through, I completely blew out my ankle. And this happened about an hour before the adoption agency called us and told us that our clearance was there, that we needed to just get our final signatures on it and they could start showing our profile. So I did what all sane humans do. With an ankle the size of a grapefruit, I hopped in my car and I grabbed the crutches we had from downstairs because you can't really walk on an ankle the size of a grapefruit. I hopped in my car, drove myself to the adoption agency, got in the door, told them what happened, quickly laid down on their floor and put my foot up on a chair, and they brought the paperwork out for me to sign. And we were on our way. And then I went to the doctor and yeah, That was a whole other adventure in and of itself, was the ankle thing. Long story short, though, in terms of the adoption, we spent, once we had all of the signatures in place and we were so excited we could finally go, it was 2 years, lots of longing, living on hope, living on prayer, doing absolutely everything we could to make some movement happen. It just wasn't to be. There was no movement happening in those. Instead of having our profile shown several times a month like we were told would happen, during those 2 years that we spent, our profile was only showed 6 times. Like, yeah, maybe once every 4 months. And we realized, once the rose-colored glasses came off, we realized we were being sold a pipe dream. And this method or this direction or this way that we were on was not going to happen for us. And that if we wanted our family, we needed to pursue some different options. And for the next year and a half, we pursued absolutely every single other domestic option we could find. We talked to lawyers, we went with bazillion, we signed on with several of them, different adoption agencies. We looked at foster care, we looked at foster to adopt, and we very, very quickly found the dark side of adoption. And we found it every single time we turned around. That children and situations were being exploited, and there was lots and lots of opportunity for people to prey on desperate and vulnerable people, especially including birth mothers who were being imported from out of state just so they could have their babies in my state and get on Medicaid, or it was a mess. And they were also preying on adoptive parents who wanted kids so desperately they were willing to pay ridiculous and exorbitant sums of money. And it was disheartening, it was scary, it was frustrating. In fact, one of the people that we worked with during that time is now in jail. And I remember the day I walked out of his office and actually threw up in the bushes outside because I knew what he was doing was wrong. And I'm like, we can't do this anymore. There's no way. And sure enough, a few years later, he got caught and he ended up in jail. But it left me with a cemetery full of dead babies. And that cemetery existed only in my heart. And nobody else could see them. Nobody else understood. Nobody else knew. But we were devastated. We were tired, and we were ready to be done at this point. So that is time number 2 that we were done. And we're just like, we're just going to love this beautiful miracle baby that we were blessed with, who was growing up way too quickly. Well, fast forward to Christmas Eve in 2005. And my sister and I were having a random conversation about some people that she knew and some of their journey. And we were just right at the point where we were truly making peace with this I'm going to be done type situation. And I made an off-the-cuff comment to my sister. And I said something along the lines of, well, if I'm going to pay that much money for an adoption, at least I need a great trip out of it. Like a vacation, right? And as soon as those words came out of my mouth, my husband and I looked at each other almost stunned. And both of us instantly felt like we'd been hit by a ton of bricks. And we knew in that moment that we weren't really done. We had honestly never considered international adoption as a viable option. And we knew we had to look. And we were with family that night, but we lived about 2 hours away. So as we drove home that night, while our daughter slept in the back seat dreaming of Santa coming, my husband and I were in the front seat, and we couldn't stop talking about, is this where we should go? What are our options? What are we going to do? And we woke up the next morning and did all the fun Christmas stuff. But the better part of the day was honestly spent on the computer, looking at options, looking at countries, looking at agencies, looking at what is this new option going to look like, because we know that we got to do something. And by the next day, we knew exactly where we were supposed to go, which agency we were going to use. The contacts had been made, and we were officially on our way to pursuing international adoption. By February, all of our paperwork had been completed and turned in. And by July of 2006, we were in the final step. Everything had been complete. Everything had just gone like clockwork. We felt, surely this is it. This is our time. This is what we're supposed to do. Everything felt so great. We were just waiting for that magical invitation to arrive that says, you've been approved. You've been invited to come and meet with our government, and we'd love to see you. And then the government in Ukraine destabilized very quickly, and things turned into chaos. There was political chaos everywhere in every facet, and they had uncovered quite a bit of fraud and quite a bit of dishonest practice going on in their current child care, the whole system that deals with their kids. And invitations to travel, especially from foreigners and especially from Americans, slowed way down. And they slowed down to just a trickle, and they eventually stopped altogether. And everyone was left in this holding tank, as you might say, waiting for a new agency to open and to see if there were going to be new regulations and restrictions placed on Americans adopting kids. During this time, though, we had some friends that were using our same agency, and they got a surprise call. One of the very last ones to trickle through before things eventually stopped altogether. And they were given 3 days notice to be in Ukraine. Have everything ready and to be in Ukraine. Drop everything, get your tickets, pay a fortune for them, and get out of here. And that was a wild ride all the way around. We didn't know that they were the end of the trickle at that time, and we thought, oh my goodness. And we were being told, hey, you guys need to be on alert. You guys are next. You're out of here. We're going to get you guys through too before this completely shuts down. And it was just a wild ride. So we're feverishly trying to keep our own stuff prepared and following the story of our friends. And after a wild and truly, utterly heartbreaking all the way around situation, our friends discovered that they had been thrown into the middle of some illegal activity that nearly landed them in jail in a foreign country. Their adoption that they were so certain of immediately failed, and they came home devastated and empty-handed. And when that happened, the agency that we were both using refused to pay the facilitator. Well, she got angry, forged a whole bunch of documents, and unbeknownst to any of us at the time, fraudulently withdrew all of our paperwork for all the remaining families with that agency from the waiting queue. And we didn't know that had happened at the time, but we knew that there were enough problems that we said, you know what, we still feel like Ukraine is the place for us to go. I don't know why, but we still feel like it's supposed to be for us. So we changed agencies. And in July of 2006, so about a year, no, about 6 months. No, about a year. It was about a year. I don't know. Oh, I can't remember. Anyway, in July of 2006, the doors opened again to those who had been waiting in this queue for months and months and months to be, they're kind of working on the backlog. They weren't accepting new applications. They were just trying to get through all of the people who had already applied and get them taken care of. And it was then that we discovered that our worst fears had been confirmed, and we learned of the fraud and the retaliation. We also learned we were now out about $10,000, and we went through several extremely stressful months, heart-wrenching, angry, hurry up and go, contentious, many late night calls to the government in Ukraine, several FedEx letters that were $100 every time we had to send a single page. All of this just to try and get our paperwork reinstated. And even though they acknowledged the fraud and they acknowledged that this had been fraudulently handled, there was no punishment to the person who had done it, and it was a no-go for us. And our answer was, you're going to have to wait and you're going to have to start all over again. And that will be when and if new American applications are being accepted. So even though we definitely had grounds at this point to file a lawsuit against our agency and to get the money back that we had lost, all we wanted was kids. We didn't want a legal battle. We didn't want any of this. And time number 3, for the third time, we hit the point of, I'm done. I am done with this whole process. I'm done with this fiasco, and we're definitely done with trying to pursue adopting in Ukraine. And we're finally just settling down and thinking, okay, what's our next step? And all of a sudden, we got an unexpected email message from the U.S. Embassy announcing that applications were once again being accepted in Ukraine, and that we realized that we still fit very narrowly within that little window that was open. And it turned out that it was only open for a very short time. And rather than laughing and saying, no way is that ever going to happen, we were hit with the same ton of bricks again and realized that once again, we weren't done and we were still supposed to pursue Ukraine. So we gathered everything together, got an application resubmitted. This time, our entire dossier that normally takes months was completed in a single afternoon. It was shipped off on Valentine's Day. By April of 2007, we finally received what we had waited for so long, and that was an invitation to come to Ukraine and meet with the government. In July of 2007, a full year after we thought it would happen, we finally found and adopted our long-awaited kids. And by this point, it was also 5 years since we started the adoption process. And no doubt, we had no doubt whatsoever that we had found the kids that we were sent to find. We thought, finally, this is it. We're okay. This has been answered. And we came home and we jumped right back into superhero mode. And I stayed there for about a year. Here's reality, though. Even though we read and researched everything we could find, because we had the time. We had no clue, absolutely no clue how traumatized our kids really were, or what that trauma looks like being played out in real life. Ukraine was definitely not the vacation that we had wanted or had been prepped for by numerous families and even by our adoption agency. And we all came home. I did, my husband did, my daughter did. And of course we brought home, we all came home traumatized, and then we brought home 2 severely traumatized children that we had no idea how traumatized they were. And unbeknownst to us, we had only knocked on hell's front door by the time that we arrived home. And I can still tell you to this day, even knowing what I know now, I have 0 regrets. And I'm glad that we did it. But there's a reason that I shared that story with you today. I hope by seeing my story that you can see what I couldn't see at the time. I couldn't see that I was already burned out before we adopted our kids. I had already hit that point of, I am so done 3 times before we ever had an actual adoption experience. I was already there. My own ability to handle all of those emotional ups and downs were already fried, and every single emotion or every single thing that came through was like living right on the surface, and it was like electric charges every time. I was already jumping at every emotional response. I didn't have effective coping skills. I didn't have effective emotional regulation skills. I didn't know how to protect myself. I didn't know how to protect my family. I didn't know how to protect my daughter. I didn't know how to open up new space. I didn't know how to open up space for my new kids and all of their insane antics that were so far over the top from anything we'd ever experienced from a child before. And nor did I have the information, the tools, the skills, or the support that I needed to make this work. But we did it, and I want you to know that. We did it, we found our way out, and that's what, I'll share more of that story with you in the coming weeks. But I want to kind of point out to you, why does this stuff matter? Why does what I've shared with you about my own story matter? Well, if you've been around, if you've watched me long enough, if you've been around me for any time, you've probably heard me preach before that this job is really hard to do, and hard to do well if you're already fried yourself. And I didn't do it well when I was burned out. There's a lot of things I did that I regret. There's a lot of things I would never do again now that I know differently. Second, it doesn't matter what is contributing to that burnout. And it's probably just more than kids. We'd had a crazy adoption ride. I blew out my ankle. We had financial stuff. We had fraud. All of that. And it was all still just stacking up, one on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other, like a concrete wall. And that stuff will eventually crush you if you're not careful, because the human body is simply not designed to take that kind of stress. And in reality, until we know what we're dealing with, and until we're willing to face all that stuff, there's nothing we can do to change it. But once you are, there is. But when we're stuck in that I'm feeling crushed mode, it's really easy to blame our kids for the problems, because they demand our attention, right? It's also easy to overlook, hey, what part is mine in this? I didn't used to be like this. It's got to be my kid's fault because I didn't used to be like this. I used to be the fun parent. So I've been asked twice in the last week. I talked about the first time last week, but I've been asked it again by somebody else. And that question is, how do you do it? How do you keep doing what you're doing? How do you keep dealing with all this stuff? Because my kids are still in my home and they still have plenty of issues. And my answer to that is still solidly, I had to be okay myself. And that is true for all of us. It starts with dropping the charades, dropping the I've got to run 1,000,000 miles an hour, and being honest with yourself. What do I need from me? Where am I really at in this? And how am I contributing? So, hey, if you're joining me live, or more likely if you're watching this on replay, what's your story? What do you have on your plate that's contributing to burnout? And what's your real level of burnout? I want you to think about those things. Answer them in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And I'm sure other people who read it are going to tell you the same thing. You're so not alone in this. So, as I wrap this up, I want to invite you to hop over to my website at serenitylinkscoaching.com. Grab my burnout quiz that is there. And then as you answer those questions, maybe even if you've taken it before, take it again and be really honest about your feelings. Be honest about where you really are and what your real ability level is. Be honest about how okay am I, or how not okay am I, because that's really where the gold is, and that's really where things can start to change, because we have the excuses are gone, all the reasons, all the excuses, all the blame is gone, and now we've got something that we can work with. And I also want to encourage you, if you don't like your score, let's figure out how to change it. I am living proof, my family is living proof, that level of burnout that I was in, and that was only what I shared with you today was that was just the tip of the iceberg. That was just the start. I really spiraled down after that, but it took a while. Let's figure out how to change that stuff. Let's figure out how to change it so we can help change your families. We can help change the dynamics in your home. I hope you, I don't know, what do I want to say here? I don't know. That's kind of the beauty of live. We just get to roll with what we say. Anyway, as you come into this coming week, or as you finish up this video, really seriously consider this for yourself. Where am I? And realize it's okay to drop the charade. You don't have to be everything and do everything. So, until next time, go grab that burnout quiz, and I will see you next week. Bye!